Sven-Göran Eriksson was a manager with over 40 years' experience. His travels saw him manage in 8 different countries in 4 continents, and when he died in August, an outpouring of love for the Swede came from the footballing world and the media. But when he was alive, he was a man that sometimes made enemies, not least with the press. A controversial figure off the pitch, his tactics were innovative, but didn't always win him too many fans. So, to decode the man's 76 years of life, I present to you the Sven-Göran Eriksson story. Sven-Göran Eriksson was born on the 5th of February 1948 in Sunne, in western Sweden. Though his father Sven's family was well off, he was mostly raised by his mother Ulla in his early years due to the country's mandatory military service. After Sven Senior returned, he moved to nearby Torsby. As a child, he did well in school so as not to incur the wrath of his strict mother, but he was mostly obsessed with sports. Like most boys growing up in Sweden, he grew up ski jumping, cross country skiing, or playing ice hockey in the winter. But when the snow melted, football took over their lives. His hero was Sweden's London 1948 champion and AC Milan legend Gunnar Nordahl, back in a time where Olympic gold in football was taken seriously. He also remembers watching Sweden's run to the 1958 World Cup final, despite his own family not having a TV at home, and despite Pele crushing Sweden's hopes, the whole town still loved him anyway. One enduring part of his childhood was his nickname, which he got from his brother, Lars Erik, who couldn't pronounce Sven Göran. He went through a couple of names that Sven didn't like, and at the end settled on Svennis. He is often simply called Svennis in Sweden, like how Josep Guardiola is often just called Pep here. In England, apart from in the most formal prose, he is always called simply Sven. He got a job as a teenager as a baker's apprentice, and this is the first break of his career. The pastry chef was Sven Ake Olsen, who was the coach of Torsby's local football and ice hockey teams. They would spend their shift talking about football, with Olsen drawing tactics in the baking sheets with flour. Playing football as a youngster, Olsen would put the IF Torsby team news on the notice board the day before to add interest to the game, with locals on their way to work having heated discussions over who was picked. In 1964, when he was 16, a new name appeared: Sven-Göran Eriksson. He was then a regular in the team, which became a big social circle. Even as he became an adult, he remained a mummy's boy. No girl he brought home was good enough for little Svenis, and she would worry about him when he went out, staying up all night. He was more interested in football than pursuing work, but that was fine. However, things finally snapped when he, without telling his parents, went to Norway to meet some girls. His mother told his father to tell him off, and Sven Senior yelled at him to sort himself out or move out. He chose the latter, deciding to study economics in Amal, 150 kilometres away. This also meant the end of his time at Torsby, where he managed 23 goals in 109 games as a right back. In the 1971 and 1972 seasons, he played for third tier SK Sivhala, who respected him enough to give him a free apartment, although still no money. Aged 22, this was where he met his future wife, Ann-Christine Peterson, who was 5 years younger than him, as was everyone else in the school. He spent just a year there playing for Sivhala when he decided to become a PE teacher, thus allowing him to continue working in sports. He moved to Örebro and ended his time at Sivhala, scoring 1 goal in 22 games. Still hoping to be a professional footballer, he contacted KB Karlskoga, who were in the second tier, and they gave him a trial. This was serious business now. Karlskoga were managed by Tord Grip, who had 3 caps for Sweden. He got on well with Grip, but the level of football was tough. He neglected his relationship with Peterson, whom he and everyone else called Anki, because she went to college elsewhere and they could only meet at the weekends. But on weekends, he played for the reserves on Saturday and made the bench for the first team on Sunday. He finally made his debut for the first team in the spring, and then regularly played for the seniors. He had broken up with Anki, but they got back together when he changed job to move closer to her. In his autobiography, Eriksson describes himself as a fullback who was not particularly talented but rarely made mistakes. This was where football tactics were still pretty primitive. Grip had moved on to join Aribro, and replacing him was the Hungarian Imre More, who still saw football as a game of 11 individuals against 11 individuals. It was when total football was just about emerging, but had not yet reached the Swedish second tier. Away to Helsingborg, A winger was constantly skinning him, and with Moray giving instructions that didn't help, Eriksson suggested why not have a centre back move out and help him. Moray responded with, that's not a bad idea. Eriksson had begun thinking like a tactician. His playing career had reached its peak, with some injuries and Karlskoga languishing in mid-table. He finished with 4 goals in 19 games for Karlskoga in the 1972 and 1973 seasons. In 1975, Grip left Örebro to join Degerfors. He called Eriksson, asking him to become his assistant. Eriksson accepted, and with a single phone call, his playing career and dreams of becoming the next Gunnar Nordahl were over. Degerfors were a historic club who had won 2 Swedish titles, but found themselves in the third tier when Grip and Eriksson arrived. Grip had played for them when he won his first Sweden cap, with a decade at the Stora Valla in total. A parochial club, Grip had some serious persuading to do to convince the board that an outsider could become assistant manager. At the time, Swedish football traditionally used a 3-back, but the English duo Bob Houghton and Roy Hodgson had revolutionised things by using a 4-4-2. You can learn more about that in the Roy Hodgson story, also on my channel, but it was very controversial in Sweden, with traditionalists hating this foreign incursion. In 1976, they won the league, but failed to get promoted from a playoff system. He also got engaged to Anki in this time, but football had to come first. Their wedding, organised for 7/7/77, had to be moved, because the 7th of July was a coaching licence class day. Earlier that year, before the 1977 season started, Grip was appointed assistant manager of Sweden. This gave a vacancy, and Eriksson's first job as manager. The season went the same as the 1976 one, with a team winning the league but falling apart in the playoffs. Eriksson believed it was a mental block and ruffled feathers by bringing in a psychologist from Norway, Willy Railo. The players hated it, but with minutes of talking, Railo had won their respect. In 1978, they won the league again, and this time the playoffs, finally reaching Division 2 once more. The Division 3 Västra Svealand crown would be his first of many trophies. In Sweden, the 2 greatest clubs were and are Malmö, managed by Bob Houghton, and IFK Göteborg. While Malmö were in the midst of a season where they would reach the European Cup final, Göteborg was struggling, having only recently been promoted back from Division 2 in 1976. In the next 2 seasons under Hans Carlsen, they had finished 6th and then 3rd. With Carlsen departing, they wanted Rangers manager Jock Wallace Jr., but were told he couldn't come for at least 6 months. They asked if there were any upcoming Swedish managers who were innovative, and Carlsen suggested Sven. So a 30-year-old man who had only managed in the 3rd tier was now in charge of Sweden's second biggest football club. Göteborg were a club who had a lot of attacking players, big but aging stars, and played so-called champagne football. Sven says the only time he ever got nervous in his career was his first training session with the side. Everyone in Sweden thought the club had gone mad, and he was 6 years younger than Björn Nordqvist, a centre-back who went on to become a centurion with Sweden, whose 115 caps were a European record until Northern Ireland goalie Pat Jennings went 4 better 8 years later. Would someone like that really respect a 30-year-old from the provinces who had only managed in Division 3? Striker Torbjörn Nilsson recalled that he thought, is this little boy really going to coach us? The players got his name wrong, calling him Sven-Erik Göransson, but realising that his own squad too had come from humble beginnings and only earned their status on the pitch, he pressed on. However, it would be an upwards battle getting them to adapt to his Anglophile philosophy. According to Sven, the words covering and pressing may as well have been in a foreign language. He was strict, moving about his players and instilling a regimented style of play. Players had to move as a unit, something often seen today but foreign 50 years ago. Zonal marking was also used instead of the traditional man marking. His early time there was challenging with the birth of his first son, meaning Anki couldn't work, and the fact that even at Göteborg he earned less than he did as a PE teacher. His results were successful, but the football was seen as dull, a break from so-called champagne football that preceded him, and this caused attendances to fall. This criticism was also aimed at Houghton and Hodgson. It would at least ready Sven for the onslaught he would get from the media at higher profile teams. Still, 1979 was a good season for Sven's team. They came second, making the UEFA Cup, 1 point behind Roy Hodgson's miraculous Halmstad, and made their way to the quarter-finals of the Cup Winners' Cup after beating Irish side Waterford and Panionios of Greece. That wouldn't take place until 1980, as Sweden's calendar year season isn't generally used in European football. There, they would lose 5-1 to English side Arsenal. In the 1980 season, Sven developed a greater appreciation for the midfield, inspired by conversations with Grip, who was now at Cerebro. They lost to Dutch side Twente in the first round of the UEFA Cup, and 1981 would be a tough start as they lost their first 3 games. After offering his resignation, this was rejected, and his players began to perform again, coming second, 4 points behind champions Ulster. The UEFA Cup also started well, getting past Finnish side Haka, Austrian Sturm Graz, and Romanians Dinamo Bucuresti to reach the quarter-finals, which would resume in March. The 1982 season would go on to be a majestic one for Göteborg. They won the Swedish Cup, Eriksson's second such honour, and beat Spanish side Valencia in the quarter-final of the UEFA Cup 4-2 on aggregate. In the semis, they faced Kaiserslautern from Germany. After a 1-1 draw away, the same scoreline occurred back in Gothenburg, leading to extra time. In the 102nd minute, they had a penalty, and defender Stig Fredriksson scored, taking them to the final, which in those days was two-legged. They would play another German side, Hamburg. The ambitious Eriksson had sold his house, hoping to move to Europe soon one day for a big job. Pioneering agent Börje Lantz, the first in Swedish football and an acquaintance of Eriksson's, lived in Portugal and had created some sort of buzz about a potential Benfica job. The 1982 UEFA Cup final had Hamburg as heavy favourites, but the first leg would be at a rainy Nya Ulevi. Hamburg would win that season's Bundesliga and next season's Bundesliga and European Cup. Meanwhile, all of Göteborg's 11 was Swedish and the club was semi-professional. The pitch was awful and Nilsson was forced off after 20 minutes. However, Göteborg dominated the game, and despite being frustrated for most of it, midfielder Todd Holmgren managed to strike in the 87th minute to give them the advantage going to Hamburg. However, the Germans were so confident they would win the second leg at the Volksparkstadion. They were selling pennants with the UEFA Cup champions 1982 on them. Instead of a team talk, Eriksson simply stuck one on the dressing room wall. Defender Glenn Heason came off in the 90th minute with injury, and Hamburg were all over them. However, a long ball led to a cross converted by striker Dan Corneliusson. With the away goal secured, Göteborg were happy to play on the counter, and in the second half, Nilsson showed his class, running through the midfield to make it 2-0. Finally, he beat the fullback, got pulled down, and Fredriksson scored the penalty. A 4-0 win on aggregate. They then beat Ulster in the Swedish Cup final a few days later. He accepted the Benfica job immediately after the UEFA Cup win, but stayed at Göteborg before the 1982-1983 season started. His last match in the Intertoto Cup, despite being a home game, was not held in Göteborg, but in his hometown of Torsby, a mark of respect towards the man who had replaced champagne football with brutal but successful UEFA Cup glory. Benfica had just come off a season where they were runners-up, finishing 2 points behind champions Sporting. Their stadium was the biggest football ground in Europe, and in the same way Göteborg was a big step up from Degerfors, this was a huge step up from Göteborg. At the airport, hundreds of people came to greet the plane, and the trophy room was stacked. But at a boardroom meeting, there was such fury at his appointment that President Fernando Martins had to fake a heart attack to escape it. He had some problems, such as the language and the fact that the squad was too large and didn't understand 4-4-2. But his ideas quickly spread, with them winning the first 11 games in a row. In his first transfer window, 10 players were shown the door and another loaned out, while the only signing was backup goalie Delgado. With that strong start, a side with mostly Portuguese talent like striker Nene, who scored 32 goals, legendary goalkeeper Manuel Bento, and midfielder Fernando Chalana, lost just 1 game all season away to Sporting and won the Portuguese title. They also had some foreign talent, most notably Yugoslavia's Zoran Filipovic, a striker who bagged 27 goals that season. Benfica also reached the final of the Taça de Portugal. This was very controversial. The Portuguese FA would rotate the venue of the final, asking a regional FA to host it. It was the turn of the Porto FA, who selected Porto's ground, the Estadio das Antas. With Porto facing Benfica in the final, Benfica then refused to play at the ground, and the Portuguese FA tried to convince Porto to allow a venue change. Porto refused, even with a threat of expulsion from the league, and the game wasn't held that season. At the same time, Benfica were in the UEFA Cup. They had beaten Spanish side Real Betis, Belgium's KSC Lokeren, and FC Zurich of Switzerland to set up a quarter-final with Roma of Italy. With Italian football not televised in Portugal at the time, Eriksson travelled there to scout his opponents with Anki. The city made an impression on him, and he vowed to her that they would live in Rome one day. A brace from Filipovic at the Olimpico set up a semi-final against Romania's side Universitatea Craiova. After a 0-0 draw in Lisbon, they found themselves 1-0 down at half-time, but Filipovic equalised to get them through on away goals. They would meet Anderlecht of Belgium in the final. This time, there was no Cinderella story. Both teams were heavyweights. At Heysel, Anderlecht were dominant, and Kenneth Briel put them ahead in the first half. They set back, and they were happy to close out a 1-0 loss, especially after midfielder Jose Luis was sent off with 15 minutes to go. They would still have it all to play for in Lisbon, and took the lead on the night through Sheo in the first half. However, 5 minutes later, Juan Lozano equalised and gave Anderlecht an away goal. Even the bold substitution of bringing on Filipovic was not enough, and the 1-1 draw was good for Anderlecht to win the cup. Still, it was a good season for Sven, who won the league and set up a cup final, as well as the UEFA Cup final. He was seen as a hero in Lisbon. The next season, they had some notable signings, including defender Antonio Oliveira from Maritimo and Danish striker Michael Manish from Fidove. Midfielder João Alves, who went to Boa Vista, was the most significant departure. Eriksson convinced Martins to relent and allow the cup final to be held at the start of the season at Porto's ground. It would be in between the two legs of the Iberian Cup against Spanish champions Athletic Bilbao. They lost the first leg in Bilbao 2-1 before the cup final at Porto's grounds. This was one of the flashpoints in the rivalry that would heat up and is today known as O Clásico. As new Porto president, Jorge Nuno Pinto da Costa would miss no opportunity to insult Benfica and the city of Lisbon, and it was his intransigence which forced the situation. However, a goal from midfielder Carlos Manuel and a brilliant goalkeeping performance from captain Bento gave Benfica a famous 1-0 victory that older fans still cherish today, completing a League and Cup double. They also won the Iberian Cup with a 3-1 victory in Lisbon, completing a 4-3 aggregate win. Though not remembered today, it was considered an official trophy at the time. Of the opening 20 league games, Benfica won 18 and drew 2. They would go on to win the league by 3 points, taking their foot off the gas a little at the end as they focused on Europe. There was some disappointment elsewhere. The traditional curtain raiser, the Supertaça Candido de Oliveira, was moved to December because of the delay. As Benfica had won the double, their opponents would be cup runners-up Porto. After a 0-0 draw in Porto, they lost a 2-1 in the home leg. They were also knocked out of the Taça in the round of 16, 2-1 away to Sporting. However, the European Cup was going well. They got past Northern Irish side Linfield and Olympiacos of Greece to start a quarter-final with English giants Liverpool. After a defensive performance at Anfield where he limited the Reds to a 1-0 win, he decided to go for it in Lisbon. However, Liverpool saw this invitation to attack and grabbed it, winning the game 4-1. Benfica were out of the European Cup, and a deflated Eriksson wondered if he had gone as far as he could with a Portuguese side. Once, when he was driving home from training, he was flagged down by someone from the Italian embassy, who informed him that Roma president Dino Viola wanted to call him in private. Viola's son Ricardo answered, saying that Dino had been very impressed with Benfica's win over Roma and wondered if he might go to the Italian capital. He was worried about a rule that foreign managers were not able to actually coach the team, but Lantz, his de facto agent by now, convinced him that that would be changed by the start of the 1984-85 season. With that in mind, he rejected offers from Barcelona and Tottenham, as well as Martins begging for him to stay to go to Roma. Roma were a strong team under the legendary Niels Liedholm, a compatriot of the Erikssons, having came second in Serie A and won the Coppa Italia. They also reached the European Cup final, losing to Liverpool on penalties at their own stadium. Eriksson had dreamed at Rome and loved everything about him, especially as his children befriended those of the extremely wealthy Viola family. He later recalled the only problem was the football team. The squad, though full of stars, were aging and losing their motivation. Under Liedholm, the leadership was lax, allowing players to come late for training. At the start, Eriksson was not even allowed on the training pitch, and characters would come and disrupt his authority. The no foreign managers rule was not changed despite Lance's assurances, and Eriksson could only accept the job of technical director. The official coach, Roberto Clagluna, who sat in the dugout in games, wanted his status, while Viola often came and watched training, and also sat next to Eriksson during matches. Though they started by topping the group stage of the Coppa Italia, they drew 7 of their opening 8 league games, losing the other one 2-1 at Milan. The legendary Brazilian midfielder Paulo Roberto Falcao, who is known as the 8th King of Rome, turned from a hero to a figure of hate. After refusing to take a penalty in the European Cup final, blaming cramp, something that which did not go well in the capital, he struggled with injuries and then went to the US for an unauthorized surgery. After this, Viola tried to annul his contract, leading to a bitter legal battle. To Eriksson's immense credit, he spotted a 25-year-old Carlo Ancelotti as the man with the football brain to replace Falcao as captain. Though they had a good spell around Christmas, Roma were pretty awful that season, finishing 7th, 9 points behind champions Hellas Verona. They were knocked out of the Coppa Italia in the round of 16 by Parma, who got relegated from the second tier that season on away goals. In the Cup Winners' Cup, they beat Romanian Steaua Bucuresti and Welsh side Wrexham before being beaten 4-1 on aggregate by Bayern Munich of Germany. Despite this rotten season, Eriksson retrained the trust of Viola, who understood the club needed a reset. Falcao was released and Maurizio Iorro was sold to Fiorentina for 4 million lira. Eriksson explains that at the time, Italian football clubs were all owned by important and wealthy men who all fought with each other over the best players. Juventus were owned by Fiat owner Gianni Agnelli, whose favourite player was the Pole Zbigniew Boniek. Viola wanted to take Boniek from Agnelli and arranged a meeting. Boniek arrived in his teammate Michel Platini's Ferrari and said to him that if they won the league, he would buy him his own. Boniek accepted, being known for his big ego. When the club were invited to an audience with Pope John Paul II, a huge occasion in ultra-Catholic Italy, every player bowed as he walked past. Boniek was the only exception, looking His Holiness in the eye and asking him, "Who is the most famous Pole in this country? You or me?" The Pope didn't answer. Even more important than the 3 million lira acquisition of Boniek was the change in the managerial rule, meaning they could finally do away with Clagluna and the Eriksson could sit in the dugout again. They had a tough start, winning 6, drawing 1, and losing 5 of their opening games. But over Christmas again, things clicked. Of the next 16, they won 13, drew 2, and only lost 3-2 away to defending champions Verona. With 2 games to go, they were level with Juventus and with a better goal difference. Their last 2 games were at home to already relegated Lecce and away to mid-table Como. Juventus had to play Milan at home before visiting Lecce. Against Lecce, the Olimpico was roaring and Viola walked around the pitch before the game and waved to the crowd, irking Eriksson, who thought there was still a job to do. Roma went 1-0 up, but a defensive error and a penalty saw them 2-1 down at the break. In the dressing room, Eriksson was furious, but his players were relaxed. They attacked much more sharply, but saw Lecce double their lead. Despite a furious siege, they could only get 1 more goal with a heroic performance from Lecce's goalkeeper. They had lost the game. Juve had beaten Milan, and the title was as good as lost. That night, Ricardo Viola relayed suspicions that his players had bet on the first half result, going behind on purpose, thinking they could easily win against the worst team in the division anyway, and then coming unstuck when they couldn't do the job. The next day, Dino was convinced that they had because the odds on Lecce dramatically shortened before kickoff. However, there was no proof. They lost the last game to Como, with Corneliusson scoring, coming second in the league by 4 points as Juventus beat Lecce on the final day. This whole affair caused Eriksson to have a bad taste in his mouth, and he wanted to leave Italy. However, he still had two more games to take care of. The Serie A season had ended early because of the World Cup, but the Coppa Italia final took place at its normal June date. It was two-legged, and with most star players in Mexico already, Eriksson had to field a young team. They faced Sampdoria, who had only avoided relegation by 4 points. In Genoa, Roberto Mancini put the hosts in front, but Sandro Tovaglieri equalised just before half-time. However, Roberto Gallia gave Sampdoria a 2-1 win. In the second leg, a penalty from Stefano Desideri put Roma level, but leading on away goals. Despite a red card for Francesco Graziani, a late goal from Brazilian substitute Toninho Cerezo secured the Coppa Italia title. Cerezo was the only foreigner to play for Roma in the final. This team of youngsters restored Eriksson's belief in Roma, and he never thought about the match-fixing suspicions again. Earlier that season, Milan had recently been taken over by the tycoon Silvio Berlusconi. He wanted to and did make Milan kings of Italian football. He organised a secret meeting with Eriksson, explaining his ambitions, and he wanted him. Things were going well, but there was a problem. He still had a contract at Roma, and Berlusconi had political ambitions. I can't steal Senator Viola's manager, he said. That Milan side, which won two European Cups in a row, was legendary. The team of Hullit, Van Basten, Maldini, Rijkaard, and Baresi, and Eriksson could have managed them if not for fate. The third season did not go well for Roma. Cerezo was involved in a fight with Dino Viola, and he was sold to Sampdoria. The young players didn't develop the way Eriksson hoped. Boniek and forward Roberto Pruzzo had lost their motivation, and a foreign player limit stopped him from signing Liverpool's John Barnes. Bruno Conti struggled with injuries. They were inconsistent, and he wanted another refresh of the team, asking Viola to sell Pruzzo, Boniek, and Conti. However, Viola refused to sell his big stars, especially Boniek. After a 4-1 loss away to Milan in the ante-penultimate game, Eriksson resigned. Roma would finish seventh, 9 points short of Diego Maradona's champions Napoli, and were knocked out of the Coppa Italia by Bologna, who finished mid-table in the second tier on away goals. In the Cup Winners' Cup, they faced Spanish side Real Zaragoza in the first round, and despite a 2-0 win at the Olympico, they lost 2-0 in Spain, and Boniek and Ancelotti missed their spot kicks in the shootout to eliminate them. He missed the birth of his second child, Lena, who had a difficult introduction to the world and needed to survive an operation to live. Eriksson said it was the first time that football had to take a back seat as he wondered whether his little girl would survive. After this, he returned to Italy to become the manager of Fiorentina. Normally, Eriksson only left when he had another job lined up, but this time he had to punch down after only ever moving up in his career, from Degerfors to Göteborg to Benfica to Roma. However, Florence was a more peaceful city after all the stress and hardship for Anki. Lena made a full recovery, and Sven and Anki lived with her and their older boy, Johan. The previous season, Fiorentina had come 10th and were knocked out of the UEFA Cup in the round of 32. Their owners had lost ambition and the club was flatlining. Eriksson bought in Huysen from Göteborg, as well as midfielder Roberto Bosco from Pescara. Some big players had left, including defenders Roberto Galbiati and Aldo Maldera, who retired, as well as Claudio Gentile, who went to Pescara, and Paolo Manelli, who went to Lazio. The main joy was in the advanced areas of the pitch, with Argentine forward Ramon Diaz a solid striker, but he paled in comparison to a little-known midfielder called Roberto Baggio, who Eriksson called the best talent he ever coached. Big praise when you consider the competition. Baggio was already a hot prospect, but injuries hindered his early career. Heason came as he was used to Eriksson's back four and zonal marking system. The season was okay, but overshadowed by the death of Pier Cesare Beretti in a plane accident. They came eighth, 2 players higher than the previous term, and 3 points off a UEFA Cup playoff. They were 5 points clear of the drop. A Maradona-inspired Napoli knocked them out of the Coppa Italia in the round of 16, although they lost the title to Berlusconi's Milan. Midfielders Luca Mattai and Stefano Salvatore came in from Como and Parmo, respectively, while Pruzzo was signed for a season after Viola released him from Roma. Forward Stefano Borgonovo came in from Milan. On the other hand, Diaz and midfielder Nicola Berti went to Inter. Defender Renzo Contratto went to Atalanta, and midfielder Roberto Onorati went to Genoa. The big signing was a midfielder from Pisa called Dunga. The Brazilian was described by Eriksson as an enforcer, and his performance helped Fiorentina click in the second half of the season, despite an inconsistent start. Baggio finally showed the player he was always destined to be, scoring 24 goals partnered with Borgonovo, who netted 16. They finished seventh, level on points with Roma, but 24 behind runaway champions Inter. There was no goal difference then, so a playoff would be held for the last UEFA Cup spot at the neutral Stadio Renato Chiodi in Perugia. Borgonovo was injured, and so Pruzzo, who started one league game all season, had to play. He scored his only goal in violet to give Fiorentina a place in Europe. However, Eriksson grew tired of Fiorentina. He was ambitious and knew that they would stay mid-table, fighting for UEFA Cup spots, a trophy he had already won in Sweden. So when Benfica contacted him, wondering if he would consider going back, he took it, despite not wanting to leave what he considered the best league in the world. It was, after all, one of his biggest ambitions to win the Serie A title at some point. At Benfica, Tony had been Eriksson's assistant manager, and was promoted to the top job when Sven left. Eriksson only joined if Tony was allowed to stay as his assistant. The previous season, they beat Porto to the title by 7 points, but lost the Tassa final 2-1 to Belenenses, and were knocked out of the UEFA Cup in the second round by Belgian side Liège. At the same time, Benfica were obsessed with European glory, having not won the European Cup since 1962, and to be knocked out by Liège was not acceptable. The main signings that season were Brazilian defender Alder and Swedish midfielder Jonas Tern, from Flamengo and Malmö respectively. On the other hand, they lost Brazilian centre-back Carlos Moser to Marseille. Benfica were a good team that lost just two games all season, but were still 4 short of champions Porto. They did win the Supertaça, beating Belenenses 4-0 on aggregate. However, they were knocked out by Vitória de Setúbal in the 4th round of the Taça. The real story was the European Cup. They had beaten Derry City of Ireland, Budapest Honved of Hungary, and Dnipro Petrovsk of the Soviet Union in the first 3 rounds easily, to set up a semi-final with French giants Marseille. They wanted an away goal and were positive in the first leg, which Brazilian forward Lima got them. However, goals from Franck Sauzet and Jean-Pierre Papin gave the hosts a 2-1 win. In Portugal, they huffed and puffed, but were unable to break down Marseille. Finally, a corner came in and went in off Angolan forward Vata Matanu Garcia. Marseille were furious. It had come off of Vata's hand, but Belgian referee Marcel van Lagenhove didn't see it, and Benfica won on away goals. They would face Sacchi's Milan in the final at the Prater Stadion in Vienna. That Milan side, captained by Franco Baresi, I remind you, also had Paolo Maldini, Ancelotti, Frank Rijkaard, Marco van Basten, and Ruud Gullit. But Eriksson was confident. Tactically, his side set up well and limited Milan. However, with the best defenders ever to play football in their midst, Benfica couldn't break them down either. Rijkaard managed to get the goal for Milan, and after that, they shut up shop. There was no breaking them down. Milan were European champions again. That off-season, Brazilian midfielder Isaias was signed from Boa Vista, and striker Rui Aguas, who scored 26 goals that season, came in from Porto. Defender William came from Vitória de Guimarães. However, Alder was sold to Roma. Coming second in the league, Benfica could only enter the UEFA Cup, where they were knocked out by Roma in the first round 2-0. In the Tassa, they lost 2-1 away to Porto in the quarter-finals. However, they had only lost one game all season in the league and were 1 point clear of Porto. With 5 games to go, they travelled to the Estadio das Antas. So many fans came to harass their bus that it got stuck, and they had to walk through a sea of screaming Porto fans to reach the stadium. Their dressing room was locked, and when it was finally opened, exactly an hour before kickoff, as the rules dictated, it had been sprayed with a chemical that made it impossible to breathe. However, the substitute, Cesar Brito, scored 2 goals to give Benfica the win, and Porto fans rioted. Benfica won the title by 2 points. With Lance's career going up in the flames of a drinking problem, Eriksson began to talk more with the Israeli agent Pini Zahavi, who had contacts in what was the soon-to-be dissolved Soviet Union. In came a pair of Russians, forward Sergei Yuran and midfielder Vasily Kulkov from Dynamo Kiev and Spartak Moscow. Attacking midfielder Rui Costa came in from Fafe. The Brazilian duo of centre-back Ricardo Gomes and attacking midfielder Valdo were bought by PSG. The defence was weakened with no Gomes. the Russians didn't settle in, being stars in their home country, and though Costa was to become a legend, he was weaker than Valdo going forwards. They lost the first game of the league season to Boa Vista and ended up in second, 10 points behind Porto. In the Tassa, they lost the semi-final 2-1 at home to Boa Vista, with a 90th minute winner from Ricky Owubokiri, a Nigerian striker that Eriksson had let go from Benfica. In the Super Tassa, they won the first leg against Porto 2-1, but lost the return 1-0. With the score 2-2 on aggregate, a replay was held in neutral Coimbra, and it was 1-1. In the shootout, Russian midfielder Alexander Mostovoy missed his penalty in sudden death, giving Porto the trophy. In the European Cup, things were different. They beat Hamrun Spartans of Malta 10-0 on aggregate in the first round, before facing Arsenal in the second. After a 1-1 draw in Lisbon, the same scoreline resulted in London, leading to extra time. Goals from Kulkov and Isaias sent them through to the group stage. Here, four teams would play home and away, and the winner would reach the final. But they lost their first game 1-0 away to Soviet side Dinamo Kiev, and drew the next two at home to Barcelona of Spain and Sparta Prague of Czechoslovakia. They also drew 1-1 away in Prague in the return game. They did beat Dinamo, now representing the CIS after the Soviet Union dissolved, 5-0 at home to give them a chance. Barca had 7 points, Sparta had 6, they had 5, and Dinamo had 2. If they beat Barca by 2 goals and Sparta didn't win, they would have gone to the final at Wembley. Dinamo beat Sparta 1-0 to set it up, but goals from Hristo Stoichkov and Jose Marie Baquero gave Barcelona a 2-1 win, with Cesar Brito scoring the goal for Benfica. Now, By now, Eriksson felt that Benfica's time had passed. He was offered jobs by the US national team and Bayern Munich, but wanted to return to Italy. He had turned down the Inter job, being persuaded to stay by Benfica director Gaspar Ramos, but regretted it and vowed to not make the same mistake again. Despite Anki wanting to stay in Portugal when Sampdoria came knocking, he instantly took the job. Sampdoria had won the Supercoppa Italiana and reached the Champions League final in the 1991-92 season, but only came sixth in the league, missing European football. Though the owner, Paolo Mantovani, was ambitious, after making the deal, he announced to Eriksson that he no longer had the money to compete with Milan, Juventus, and Inter, and that they had to sell star forward Gianluca Vialli to Juventus for what was a world record fee at the time. In fact, Mantovani's ambitions were not contained just by money, but illness. Cerezo was sold to Sao Paulo, his compatriot and fellow midfielder Paulo Silas to Internazionale, and Italian midfielder Fausto Pari to Napoli. They still made some signings, with Yugoslav midfielder Vladimir Jugovic joining from Crvena Zvezda, English defender Des Walker signing from Nottingham Forest, and midfielder Eugenio Corini, forward Mauro Bertarelli, and defender Michele Serena coming in from Juve. Though Vialli was gone, the other star player Mancini remained. He scored 15 goals, but the forwards didn't really produce. Walker's pace made him a monster in England, but in Italy his timidity meant he was found out. Sampdoria finished 7th, 6 points clear of relegation, 1 point off of Europe, and 14 points behind champions Milan. They were knocked out of the Coppa Italia in the second round by second-tier Cesena on away goals. Eriksson constantly pushed Mantovani to make signings ahead of the 1993-94 season. He delivered, with Dutch forward Hullit and midfielder Alberico Evani joining from Milan, the former on loan, as well as English midfielder David Platt coming from Juventus. Fausto Salzano also joined from Roma. Going the other way, Walker was sold to Sheffield Wednesday, Carini was loaned to Napoli, defender Marco Lana was sold to Roma, and forward Enrico Chiesa loaned to Modena. Though there was excitement on the pitch, his home life deteriorated. Anki had been moved from her dream home in Portugal to Genoa and had grown sick of him. He was obsessed with football, and it was clear she never came first in his life. She often shouted at him, while he simply walked away. This was when he started his first affair. Around that time, Mantovani died, and his son Enrico took over as president. The relationship was never strong as that with Paolo, and the same was true between the younger Mantovani and Mancini. However, a good start on the pitch was underlined by a 3-2 win at home to Milan, from which they came back from 2-0 down. Eriksson had a grudge, seeing Fabio Capello's success as nothing more than the result of being served the best players by Berlusconi. Hullit too wanted to prove to Capello that he was wrong to let him go, and he scored the winner, celebrating wildly. Capello complains that there should have been a free kick. Milan still won the title, 6 points clear of Sampdoria, who came third. They also reached the Coppa Italia final, where they faced second-tier Ancona. They drew the away leg 0-0, but won 6-1 at home to take home Eriksson's first silverware in Genoa. A blow to Sampdoria came when Hullet decided that at the end of his loan he would return to Milan. Their number one goalie, Gianluca Pagliuca, went to Inter, while Walter Zenga replaced him, going the other way. Defender Riccardo Ferri also joined from Inter, while midfielder Riccardo Maspero joined from Cremonense. Yugoslav defender Sinisa Mihailovic joined from Roma. Without Hullet, they struggled, but the Dutchman had struggled back in Milan, so halfway through the season he returns on loan to Sampdoria. However, he was not as motivated as he used to be, and he was half the player he was the previous season. Just one member of the squad. They finished 8th, 2 points off the UEFA Cup, in the first season with 3 points for a win. They lost the Supercoppa on penalties to Milan after a 1-1 draw and were knocked out of the Coppa Italia by Fiorentina 3-2 in aggregate. In the Cup Winners' Cup, they beat Norwegians Buda Glimt and Swiss side Grasshopper to set a quarter-final with Porto up. Though the Dragons won in Genoa with Yoran scoring the only goal, Mancini scored in the Antas to send the game to extra time and then penalties. Sampdoria won and set up a semi-final with Arsenal. The Gunners won the home leg 3-2, which at least gave Eriksson's men 2 away goals. Back in Genoa, Mancini gave them the lead, which would have put them ahead on away goals. Ian Wright put the Gunners back in front, and with time running out, he put teenager Claudio Bellucci on. He scored to give Sampdoria the lead on away goals in the 85th minute, and then again in the 86th minute to put them in front outright. They were through to a Cup Winners' Cup final, but for one more twist. A free kick was given to Stefan Schwartz, who played under Eriksson at Benfica, who equalised in the 89th. It went to penalties, and David Seaman saved 3 of them to knock Sampdoria out. At the time, Eriksson blamed luck, thinking the manager couldn't influence a penalty shootout. At the same time, Eriksson and Anki got divorced. This was stressful, but did not affect his professional life. The next season, they signed Chiesa back from Cremonense and French midfielder Christian Karembeu from Nantes. Dutch midfielder Clarence Seedorf joined from Ajax, and forward Filippo Maniero and defender David Balleri joined from Padova. Angelo Pajotto joined from Pistoiese and displaced Senga as number one. However, Sampdoria could not afford to keep their stars. Hullet was sold to Chelsea and Platt to Arsenal, with Yugoslav midfielder defender Pietro Vierchowod and midfielder Attilio Lombardo all joining Juventus. Defender Michele Serena joined Fiorentina. Again, Sampdoria came 8th, 2 points off the UEFA Cup. They were knocked out of the Coppa Italia in the round of 16 by Cagliari. Though Sampdoria were mediocre, he settled for this as he enjoyed the calm life he had built there. Next season, he signed Argentine midfielder Juan Sebastian Veron from Boca Juniors, forward Vincenzo Montella from Genoa, goalie Fabrizio Ferron from Atalanta, and French midfielder Pierre Laguel from Lens, among others. However, Seedorf was sold to Real Madrid, Chiesa, who had just scored 22 goals, was sold to Parma, Pajotto went to Milan, and Maniero to Hellas Verona. This time, he got Sampdoria to 6th, getting the last UEFA Cup spot, although still 12 points off champions Juventus. They were also knocked out of the Coppa Italia in a second-round replay at home to Genoa of the second tier. By now, he wanted to reboot his career, and an agent had talked to him about the Blackburn job. He signed the contract, but was disappointed when owner Jack Walker refused to bring Mancini with him. At the same time, Lazio owner Sergio Cragnotti, who had massively invested in the club, came calling, wanting to appoint Eriksson. Eriksson had a great chance of finally winning the Scudetto he had been chasing for years. He got out of the contract by luck, as Roy Hodgson had been sacked at Inter, and Eriksson convinced Walker to take Hodgson instead. The previous season, Lazio had finished 4th in the league, but like Eriksson, were known as a club that would be all right, but not actually go all the way to win the title. They had also been knocked out by Spaniards Tenerife in the UEFA Cup second round. In came Mancini from Sampdoria, Jugovic and Croatian forward Alan Boksic from Juventus, and defenders Giovanni Lopez and Giuseppe Pancaro from Vicenza and Cagliari, respectively. Not long into the season, he found star forward and fan favourite Giuseppe Signori to be a bad influence, so gave him to Sampdoria, ruffling feathers. Despite furore from the fans who invaded the training ground, the complaints disappeared when they went on a 16-game unbeaten streak. Fighting for the title, they were third, 2 points behind Juventus with 7 games to go. Playing the old lady at home, they lost 1-0. After this, they fell apart. They drew 1-1 away to Brescia and then lost their last five on the bounce to finish seventh, 18 points behind Juve. They did reach the Coppa d'Italia final against Milan, but lost the game 1 at the San Siro 1-0 thanks to an 89th minute winner from George Weah. At the Olimpico, Dimitriano Albertini put Milan 1-0 up, giving them an away goal. However, Giorgio Gottardi got one back and was then fouled, with Juranovic scoring the penalty. Lazio were level, but still behind on away goals. However, their onslaught was ferocious, and Alessandro Nesta made it 3-2 on aggregate. In his autobiography, Eriksson took great joy in Fabio Capello's sulking after the game. Lazio were also in the UEFA Cup that year. They had beaten Vitoria Gimenez, Russian side Rostov Volgograd, Austrians Rapid Vienna, French side Auxerre, and Spanish Atletico de Madrid to reach the final against Inter. It would be at the Parc des Princes in Paris. An Inter side with Javier Zanetti, Diego Simeone, Yuri Djorkov, Ivan Zamorano, and Ronaldo beat them 3-0, with Zamorano, Zanetti, and Ronaldo getting the goals. This year was big in his personal life, as the married lawyer Nancy Dell'Olio began an affair with him. Next season, a huge amount of players were signed, including forward Christian Vieri from Atletico, Chilean forward Marcelo Salas from River Plate, Portuguese defender Fernando Couto from River Plate, Yugoslav defender Sinisa Mihailovic from Sampdoria, Portuguese midfielder Sergio Conceição from Porto, and Yugoslav midfielder Dejan Stankovic from Crvena Zvezda. Going the other way, forward Pierluigi Casiraghi joined Chelsea, Jugovic went to Atletico, midfielder Diego Foser went to Parma, and Signori, who Lazio still had ownership rights over, was loaned to Bologna. In winter, they added midfielder Attilio Lombardo from Crystal Palace. Finally, a big positive came when rules banning foreign assistant managers were removed. He was able to bring Grip, someone whom he remained in constant contact with, in as his assistant. A tough start to the season began, and things only improved when he started playing Mancini in midfield rather than as a second striker. This was actually not his own idea, but Mancini's request, which he granted despite at first thinking it ridiculous. They won their next 9 on the trot, despite challenges at Lazio. The Yugoslav players had relatives at home during the wars there, and Kranjotti was unwilling to sign black players in case it angered Lazio's support, which was known for a racist element. In his personal life, Dell'Olio had left her husband to formalise the relationship with him, but he quickly felt cramped by her. But Lazio were top of the league with 8 games to go, 7 points clear of Milan. A 0-0 draw in their game at home to them was good enough, but they lost the next 2, away to Roma and at home to Juventus. Suddenly the gap had shrunk to just a point. They needed to win 5 more games. Trips to Sampdoria and Udinese were ticked off, as was a home win over Bologna, without conceding a goal. Unfortunately for Eriksson, his old club Fiorentina would keep him unstuck and keep up what was now becoming a hoodoo for him, despite a ferocious onslaught at Fiorentina's goal. They could only manage a 1-1 draw. Milan kept their nerve and Lazio lost their title by a point. Eriksson's nickname by this point for coming so close at Fiorentina and Sampdoria was already Il Perdente Successo, the successful loser. Once again, he had lived up to it. In the Coppa d'Italia, they were knocked out by Inter in the quarter-finals. They did win the Super Coppa at the start of the season 2-1 at Juventus, thanks to an injury-time winner from Conceição. Europe had been a tough fight, though. In the Cup Winners' Cup, they faced Lausanne Sport of Switzerland in the first round. Stankovic got sent off in the second minute of the first leg at home, but Lausanne missed a resulting penalty and Lazio got away with a 1-1 draw. A 2-2 draw in Switzerland led to an away goals win. In the second round, they faced Partizan of Yugoslavia, drawing 0-0 at home but winning 3-2 in Belgrade. Panionios were dispatched 7-0 on aggregate in the quarter-final, setting up a semi-final with Russian side Lokomotiv Moscow. A 1-1 draw in Moscow and a 0-0 stalemate in Rome led to another away goals victory. The cup final, the last ever as the competition was being abolished, would be held against Spaniards Mallorca at Villa Park in England. Vieri gave Lazio the lead early on, but Dani equalised for Mallorca. With 10 minutes to go, the ball fell to one of Eriksson's favourite ever players, Pavel Nedved. The Czech midfielder saw a clearance come to him, and a brilliant volley closed out a competition which helped define European football in the 20th century. Eriksson had won European silverware again, but the Scudetto he longed for eluded him once more. The money kept on flowing next season. Veron was signed from Parma, as was Argentine defender Roberto Sensini. Midfielder Diego Simeone, also from Argentina, came in from Inter. Forward Simone Inzaghi joined from Piacenza. However, there was a big exit as Vieri was sold to Inter for $50 million, a world record. It was the second time Eriksson was manager when a player had been sold for a world record fee after Vialli. Simeone being part of the deal was a big positive, but Vieri was a big loss. He was restless and wanted to move club every season. When Eriksson signed for Lazio, he told Cragnotti that if they signed three players, Mancini, Mihailovic, and Veron, they would win the league. At the time, Cragnotti only bought Mancini. Now he had all three of them. Things started with the 1999 UEFA Super Cup final at the Stade Louis II in Monaco against Manchester United, winners of the Champions League, as the European Cup had been renamed. The newly knighted Sir Alex Ferguson's Red Devils included the likes of Jaap Stam, Andy Cole, Paul Scholes, Roy Keane, and David Beckham. But substitute Marcelo Salas would score the only goal and win another cup for Lazio. They were playing well that season, although things were made tougher by a tabloid publishing pictures of him with an actress, causing the newspaper to be boycotted by the club. The season was turning out to be tough. With Nesta, Veron, and Simeone, Lazio were brilliant. But the problem was that Ancelotti, who had retired and become a manager, led an equally amazing Juventus team inspired by Zinedine Zidane. At the time, there were a lot of question marks circling the old lady. There was a doping scandal a couple of years before, and with 2 games to go, they led Lazio by 2 points in the league. Lazio won 3-2 away to Bologna, despite Signori nearly getting revenge with a brace, while Juventus led Parma at home 1-0 going into injury time. A corner came in and was headed in by Parma's Fabio Cannavaro, but a foul was given inexplicably. Lazio fans marched through the streets of Rome with a coffin saying football, as Cragnotti called it an unfathomable injustice. In fact, the referee would be banned in 2006 for accepting bribes from Juventus. That said, there was still one more game, and Lazio hosted mid-table Regina at a sunny Olimpico, easily winning 3-0 in Mancini's final game. He would become Eriksson's assistant at the end of the season. Juventus would visit Perugia, but the pitch was waterlogged, meaning the game got delayed after the end of the first half. By the time it restarted with a score 0-0, Lazio's game had already finished. The whole crowd stayed in the stadium, glued to their radios. When Perugia did score, a huge roar. But then everyone shut up as not to jinx things. Even moving could be bad luck. Eriksson paced back and forth, white as a sheet. The good thing was that the legendary Pierluigi Collina was refereeing the match. And finally, full time. Bedlam. Their second title ever. The other had come in 1974. Lazio had also made the Coppa Italia final against Inter. In the home leg, Seedorf put Inter in front early on, but goals from Simeone and Nedved overturned it for a 2-1 win. A 0-0 draw at the San Siro completed a double for Lazio. In that season's Champions League, Lazio were in a group with German side Bayer Leverkusen, Dynamo Kiev, now of an independent Ukraine, and Slovenian side Maribor. They easily got through the group, winning 4 games and drawing 2, and went to a second group where the top 2 of 4 would go through. They were joined by Chelsea of England, Dutch side Feyenoord, and Marseille. A 2-0 win in Marseille was followed by a goalless draw at home to Chelsea and a 2-1 loss at home to Feyenoord. They drew 0-0 in Rotterdam but thrashed Marseille 5-1 at home. With a final game away to Chelsea, the Blues were on 10 points, they were on 8, Feyenoord 7, and Marseille were eliminated on 3. Chelsea were now managed by Vialli and led through Gus Poyet. However, in the second half, goals from Inzaghi and Mihailovic gave them a famous win, despite a late red card for Couto. Valencia awaited in the quarter-final, but they were thrashed 5-2 at the Mestalla. They could only manage a 1-0 win in the home leg. Eriksson is keen to bring up the allegations that circled Valencia about doping in his autobiography, although their truthfulness is unclear. Still, an Italian League and Cup double, the Super Cup as well, and a Champions League quarter-final is the record of an elite club. Eriksson was named Serie A Coach of the Year. This was underscored by the huge amount of money spent in the transfer window. Argentine forward Hernan Crespo came in from Parma, and goalie Angelo Peruzzi joined from Inter as the highlights. Argentine midfielder Matias Almeida and Conceição went to Parma, and Mancini retired as the major outgoings. The season started in earnest, but Eriksson's mind was wandering. He had received a call from the English FA, who had a new chief executive. Eriksson still wanted to stay at Lazio for the season, having signed Crespo, got Mancini in as assistant, and thought it was a good chance of winning the Champions League. The FA was fine with this, while Cragnotti was also okay. understanding just how important the England job was. He called it the biggest job in world football. But the English press would start to gather at Lazio training sessions, irritating his players. At the same time, he sent Grip to scout English football. Knowing that he was leaving, the players did not perform as well. They won 6, drew 3, and lost 3 of the first 12 league games, putting them fourth. Udinese had dumped them out of the Coppa d'Italia in the quarter-finals. There were some positives. They had won the Super Coppa against cup runners-up Inter 4-3 in a wild game. In the Champions League, their group contained Arsenal, Dinamo Kiev, and Sparta Prague, now of an independent Czech Republic. Despite only taking 1 point against Arsenal, they won the other 4 games and went through to the second group, which contained Real Madrid of Spain, Anderlecht, and English side Leeds United. This did not go well, losing the first 2 games away to Anderlecht and at home to Leeds 1-0. The next match of the season, they played Napoli at home. They went down early and lost 2-1. During the game, they were booed by fans who held banners calling for him to resign. He heeded that request, but was lauded by fans when he had attended an exhibition match against China's national team. The successful loser was now called Il Mitico, the legend. He loved Italian football, and it was his life's ambition to win a Scudetto. At Lazio, he finally had. He would never manage in Italy again. Resigning from Lazio allowed Eriksson to take the England job early. The Three Lions had not been in a good place at this point, despite a brilliant home European Championships in 1996, where they reached the semi-finals. They were mediocre at the 1998 World Cup and Euro 2000. They had also had a rocky start to the 2002 World Cup qualifiers. It was also a unique time for a national side, as Empire Stadium, known to most people as Wembley, was being demolished. The new Wembley wouldn't be ready for a while, so they were nomadic, touring the country. There was a lot of criticism about them signing a foreign manager. This did not take place in a vacuum. It was a time in which English identity was confusing. England was rapidly globalising, becoming more multicultural, and this was threatening to many. European integration and the fact that Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland were getting more power through devolved governments in the UK system also led to this confused feeling. The national identity was perhaps spearheaded by the football team, who made it socially acceptable to fly an England flag again, once seen as a sign of far-right extremism. But even then, tabloid newspapers would gleefully use jingoistic terms to describe opponents: Krauts, frogs, jocks, and this was blamed for a riot when Germany beat England on penalties at the Euros. At the same time, the Premiership was on its way to replacing Serie A as the best league in the world, but there were worries there too. When Lazio got that win over Vialli's Chelsea, the Italian had fielded a team without a single English or even British player. As the Premiership attracted the best foreign players and managers, Canary Wharf the best bankers from the EU, and companies the cheapest foreign labour, were the English being left behind? Some thought that that was what was happening when a man called Sven-Göran Eriksson from Sweden was appointed manager. A well-known protester who dressed up as John Bull on topics like opposing the UK entering the Eurozone, held a sign stating, "FA, hang your heads in shame." In the Mail came this extraordinarily nonsensical prose from a columnist called Jeff Powell, calling it a black armband day for England. "We've sold our birthright down the fjord to a nation of 7 million skiers and hammer throwers who spend half their lives in darkness," he wrote. He then explained how the country was now Third World Britain, which now resembles Bangladesh. However, even he admitted that he was a tactical improvement from his predecessor Kevin Keegan, whose time in charge of England fell to pieces. Though this sentiment was common, Yeriksson's appointment in other ways fit the time. It was very New Labour, with a Scottish chief executive of the FA eager to do things differently, with the old way of doing things seen to have gone too far. Prime Minister Tony Blair made a bet with Eriksson on who would last longer, seeing as they were both two impossible jobs. It feels weird to get too political in a video about Football Manager, especially one who didn't care about politics, even when he managed at Lazio. He once got in trouble for reading the wrong newspaper on the bus in Falls, because it was the wrong political affiliation in this strongly working class town. He didn't care about that, although sometimes he had to come into contact with it, especially in Italy. But the England football team is considered almost a personification of the country, like Uncle Sam is for America. It is, of course, a country to most people who live there, but technically it isn't, with no government of its own. It's a part of the UK, but the other parts do have their own government. The job of manager is considered second only to the Prime Minister, and just as difficult. The press take great joy in trying to trip both men up, and they had a lot of ammo. His salary was much higher than Keegan's, and when he tried to buy a fancy house, it was a field day for them. An international job has a lot of differences to a club job. The main two are that you can't buy players and you get limited time with them. England's struggles had led to a target to rebuild and win the 2006 World Cup. At the time, they were still in qualifying for 2002. Even though now qualifying is considered easy, with a bad start, it was not guaranteed. They have failed to qualify as recently as 1994. As well as Grip, Peter Taylor and Steve McLaren were in the coaching staff. Their first game was a friendly at home to Spain, where he handed Chris Powell his debut at left back, a problem position. Apart from that, David Beckham, Paul Scholes, Michael Owen, Sol Campbell, and Rio Ferdinand were among the stars in his team. Held at Villa Park in Birmingham, England won 3-0 against a quality Spain side, although one that had not yet become the super team it would become. Suddenly, the hormonal English press thought Sven was a genius, the best manager in the world. England's last game at the old Wembley was their first 2002 World Cup qualifier against Germany. They lost 1-0 and Kevin Keegan resigned, having lost all confidence in his ability to do the job. Germany is the biggest enemy for England's tabloids. They love to get one over the Germans, often bound up in World War II phraseology. Notoriously, before Euro 96, the Daily Mirror printed the headline, Achtung! Surrender! Mirror declares football war on Germany. England's players had photos with them, World War II helmets digitally added. And editor Piers Morgan wrote this. Last night, the Daily Mirror's ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we had heard from them by 11 o'clock, a state of soccer war would exist between us, parodying Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain's address at the beginning of the Second World War. This then was a big blow. Keegan's resignation, however, came at a difficult time, as they had another qualifier in Finland a few days later. This left them with caretaker Howard Wilkinson, who could only manage a 0-0 draw. With 1 point, England were at the bottom of the group. It was a tough group, also containing Greece and Albania. Only the top team would qualify, with second place making the playoffs. Their first qualifier under Eriksson would be the return game against Finland at Anfield in Liverpool. It was a tough game as Aki Rihilati put them behind, but goals from Owen and Beckham gave England a much needed, if unconvincing, 2-1 win. The next game was away to Albania. Rather than Powell, Eriksson opted to give a debut to young Arsenal left back Ashley Cole. There was never a question about the position again, despite a frustrating game. England eventually broke Albania down and won 3-1. A friendly against Mexico at Derby's Pride Park led to a 4-0 win. Michael Carrick, Joe Cole, and Alan Smith got their debuts off the bench. The Three Lions would then travel to Athens. England won 2-0, giving Eriksson 5 wins from his opening five, the first manager to do so. England Football Online's Josh Ben praised the selection of Cole, who he called the discovery of the international season. The winning run came to an end with a friendly at White Hart Lane in London, where England lost 2-0 to the Netherlands. The game saw Owen Hargreaves get his debut, but other than that, is not remembered. The next one is part of England folklore. There's another part to England's rivalry with Germany, one that lasted beyond Eriksson's tenure, the inferiority complex. England beat Germany FR, the official name for West Germany, in the 1966 World Cup final. A game so romanticised it now feels less of a football game and more something that sits on bookshelves in between Snow White and Hansel and Gretel. But since that, a legacy of coming unstuck against the Germans. In the 1970 World Cup defence, they squandered a 2-0 lead to lose 3-2 in the quarter-final. In the 1990 World Cup and Euro 1996, the only time they've reached a semi-final since, Germany were their conquerors. This feeling that Germany knew how to run football better than them, as cold but efficient dispatchers of plucky, hearty England, ran past Eriksson's tenure and was only really extinguished at Euro 2020 under Gareth Southgate. But it also meant that beating them felt all that bit sweeter. The English stereotype of the German, as it extends to football, is efficient, sophisticated, but arrogant. Several German football figures talked about the inevitability of their victory as they went 1-0 up early on through Carsten Jankner. Michael Owens equalised soon after, and Steven Gerrard scored in injury time to give England the lead at the break. The second half completed what was England's best moments of the decade. Owen got two more to finish off a hat-trick, and to top it off, even Heskey scored, as the chant still sang by England fans today goes. The image of the scoreboard, Deutschland ein, England's Fünf, is still iconic. Song called Sven 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 hit #1 in the charts. Lyrics include "He's a lovely geezer, but don't forget that he's from Sweden," and "Steven Gerrard crossed the German line. Winston Churchill would be proud as he put up the victory sign." Of course, for Eriksson, this patriotic fervour was hardly interesting, but he was happy that his side were now in a good position to qualify. 4 days later, they travelled to St James's Park in Newcastle to host Albania. Owen scored again, and Fowler added one late on to round off a 2-0 win. With it one game to go in Group 9, England now led the standings on 16 points, with a goal difference of +10, while Germany also had 16, but their goal difference was +4. Finland in third were on 11 points, meaning it was between the two old rivals for the top spot. England would host Greece at Old Trafford in Manchester, while Germany would also play at home to Finland in the arena Al Schalke in Gelsenkirchen. England's game against Greece is just as iconic as the Germany one. It says a lot about England's fortunes, then, that two qualifying games could be considered part of their lore. No qualifiers since have been remembered very long in the public conscious, apart from the one against Croatia for Euro 2008, which meant they failed to qualify for the competition, the only tournament they've missed in the 21st century. Greece led at half-time through Angelos Charisteas, while Germany were drawing in Gelsenkirchen. England were pre-match favourites, and when Teddy Sheringham equalised, most thought that they would go on to win easily. However, a minute later, Demis Nicolaides hit Pack, putting Greece back in front. England huffed and puffed, but the clock ticked past 90 without a goal. Finally, a free kick was awarded in injury time, and after an argument with Sheringham, Beckham stepped up. Top bins, and probably the most famous goal of his life. Seconds earlier, the full-time whistle blew in Gelsenkirchen. Germany had been held by Finland. England had qualified for the World Cup and confined their hated rival to the playoffs. England finished 2001 with a friendly against Sweden at the same venue, where a rotated side drew 1-1. Trevor Sinclair was given his debut. At the end of the year, Eriksson was named the winner of the BBC Sports Personality of the Year Coach Award for the best sporting coach in Britain. At the same time, Eriksson's life was having its own twists. He had just met television presenter Ulrika Jonsson, with whom another affair would soon start. Manchester United Sir Alex Ferguson had announced that the 2001-02 season would be his last with the club. Eriksson signed a contract to replace him after the 2002 World Cup, but then Ferguson changed his mind. The affair with Johnson leaked to the press, but it did not bother the FA. It did, however, overshadow the selection of his first World Cup squad. The period after the Sweden game was unique for Eriksson. Instead of week in, week out football with him in the dugout, he spent most of his time travelling the country watching domestic games. The only action was non competitive. In February, England drew 1-1 away to the Netherlands in a friendly in Amsterdam as three players received their debut: Wayne Bridge, Michael Ricketts, and Darius Vassell. In March, they hosted Italy at Elland Road in Leeds and lost 2-1. In April, they hosted Paraguay at Anfield and won 4-0. Once the questions about his relationship had dissipated, Eriksson's World Cup squad was talked about. Steve McManaman was the most surprising omission, but it was a strong side. David Seaman, Ashley Cole, Rio Ferdinand, Sol Campbell, David Beckham, Paul Scholes, Steven Gerrard, Robbie Fowler, Michael Owens, Owen Hargreaves, and Joe Cole among the star names. A big blow came when Gerrard was injured in the last Premiership game of the season and missed the tournament. Gary Neville's absence was also hugely felt. The tournament would take place in Japan and the Korea Republic, which is known to most people as South Korea. All of England's games would be in Japan, however. England's group contains Sweden, Argentina and Nigeria. England would play 2 warm-up friendlies, a 1-all draw away to the Koreans and a 2-all draw against Cameroon and Japan. Finally, after 3 decades in management, Eriksson went to the World Cup, not as a commentator, but as a coach. Fittingly, it was against his home country of Sweden at the Saitama Stadium 2002 in Saitama. England started strong and had the lead at half-time thanks to a Campbell header from a corner, but Sweden dominated the second period and got a point thanks to Niklas Alexandersson. Alongside Germany and neighbours like Scotland and the Republic of Ireland, England's fiercest rivals are Argentina. The UK fought the Argies, as they are often called here, in the Falklands War of 1982, and the tension is still just as strong in South America there today. A small archipelago of just thousands of British citizens, Argentina see it as their territory, occupied by a colonial empire. The UK see the islands as theirs, backed up by votes to stay in the UK. The UK won the 1982 war, but the rivalry between the countries would stay strong in football. In the 1986 World Cup, Argentina beat England 2-1 in the quarter-final, a game known for the goal of the century by Diego Maradona, as well as the even more famous Hand of God goal where he handballed it in. In 1998, in the round of 16, where England lost to Argentina in the World Cup, David Beckham received a red card for kicking back at Diego Simeone after a foul. Effigies of Beckham were burned in England, while the Mirror went with 10 heroic lions, 1 stupid boy. The Daily Mail published a dartboard with Beckham's face as the bullseye. The Sapporo Dome in Sapporo would host a rematch between the teams. It was hardly a classic, but remembered for one thing. Just before half-time, Mauricio Pochettino tripped up Owen in the box. Showing huge character, Beckham stepped up to take the penalty and scored. The indoor arena that was filled to the brim with England fans reacted wildly. Not as exciting, but just as impressive was the defensive performance in the second half to close a 1-0 win. It was a tactical masterclass from Eriksson, who was proud to note that after the tournament finished, the FIFA Technical Committee rated it the best tactical game of the World Cup. England's last group game came against Nigeria at the Nagai Stadium in Osaka, and it was a laboured 0-0 draw, meaning they went through only in second, behind Sweden. This meant they would face Denmark in the round of 16 in the Niigata Stadium in Niigata. Denmark were a strong side, having beaten reigning champions France in the group, but English demolished them, winning 3-0 with goals from Rio Ferdinand, Michael Owen and Emil Heskey. This game is forgotten, but it was very impressive in the World Cup knockouts. They set up a quarter-final with record 4-time champions Brazil in the Shizuoka Stadium in Shizuoka. This was a very strong Brazil team at a time when that yellow jersey really meant something. Lucio in a strong back three, Cafu and Roberto Carlos as the wing-backs, and Ronaldinho and Rivaldo behind Ronaldo as the front three. Lucio made an error to allow Owen to give England the lead. However, right before half-time, England found themselves out of position, and Ronaldinho found Rivaldo. Soon after the break, a famous moment in England's history of what-ifs. A free kick, deep out, was crossed by Ronaldinho. However, it went too deep and sailed over Seaman, who was off his line, into the net. A few minutes later, he was sent off for a stamp on Danny Mills, and England had a man advantage. But even so, Eriksson could not get his men to find control of the game. Brazil went on to win the World Cup, and though England was strong, looking at that Brazil team, it's fair to say that it was their year. England would target the next one. The Euro 2004 cycle had started with a 1-1 draw against Portugal in a friendly at Villa Park. By now, Eriksson had lost some of his shine, being seen as godlike after the 5-1 win in Germany by the English press. People thought he wasted an opportunity with the Brazil game, and friendlies were turgid, with him not picking the best team and often using lots of substitutions. Turkey, Slovakia, FYR Macedonia, and Liechtenstein were in their qualifying group. Again, only the top team would qualify, with second going to a playoff. England's first game would be in Bratislava, and they did not play well in the first half and were 1-0 down, but came from behind to win 2-1. Their next game was against FYR Macedonia, the former Yugoslav Republic, now known as North Macedonia, at St Mary's Stadium in Southampton. They could only manage a 2-2 draw. Seaman made another error, and he was never picked again for England. Perhaps the rot that had surrounded Eriksson was underlined by a friendly at Upton Park in London at home to Australia. He substituted the whole team at half-time in a 3-1 loss. In total, 6 players received debuts. James Beattie, Paul Robinson, Paul Konchesky, Jermaine Genus, Francis Jeffers, and a teenage Everton forward called Wayne Rooney. The position of Owen's strike partner had been a problem for Eriksson in the 2002 World Cup, with Emil Heskey, as he put it, up and down. Eriksson said Rooney was the only player who performed admirably against Australia, so was picked for the next set of qualifiers. After a 2-0 win away to Minnows Liechtenstein, a big game against World Cup semi-finalist Turkey beckoned at the Stadium of Light in Sunderland. Rooney was given his first start. He played brilliantly, was man of the match, and England won 2-0. It was a great performance and made Euro 2004 qualification seem a lot more straightforward. In May, they had a friendly away to South Africa, which they won 2-1, with a highlight of the trip a meeting with former President Nelson Mandela. They then hosted Serbia and Montenegro, as Yugoslavia was now known, at the Walker Stadium, today the King Power Stadium in Leicester, with another 2-1 win. Defender John Terry made his debut off the bench in this game. This was a warm-up to their qualifier against Slovakia at Middlesbrough's Riverside Stadium. Again, they were behind at the break, but a brace from Owen gave them the third 2-1 win of the period. Eriksson says that not long after this game, Real Madrid called asking about David Beckham, and a few days later they signed him. He also says that Roman Abramovich asked him which club he should buy, Chelsea or Tottenham. After picking the former, Eriksson was offered the job but refused to leave England. He claims to have given Abramovich advice on which players to buy. England won their next game, a friendly at home to Croatia at Portman Road in Ipswich, 3-1. They beat the Macedonians 2-1 away and Liechtenstein 2-0 at Old Trafford in their next set of qualifiers. With one game to go, England had 17 points, Turkey 16, and Slovakia, who were third, had 7. Thus, at Istanbul's Sukru Saracoğlu Stadium, another decisive match. England had been under the cosh in between the September and October international breaks. Rio Ferdinand had been banned for a doping whereabouts offence, leading other players to threaten to go on strike. Meanwhile, Turkish and English fans were on bad terms following a number of fights, some of them fatal at club level in the previous few years, meaning England fans were banned from making the trip. This meant a hostile atmosphere in the stands and a tetchy battle on the pitch between England and the Turks, who were massively up for it. David Beckham slipped and missed a penalty in the first half, leading to taunting from the Turkish players. But with no Ferdinand, a young Terry stepped up in defence alongside Campbell to close out a clean sheet in a 0-0 draw. It was 6 years to the day of a deadlock away to Italy to qualify for the 1998 World Cup. Though nowhere near as famous, this was a similarly gutsy performance for England. Chelsea came knocking again, and this time Eriksson accepted to join after Euro 2004. However, the story got out, and the FA offered an improved contract in exchange for publicly denying any interest in the Blues. He accepted this and missed the opportunity of joining what would become a mega club. At the same time, England were experimenting again. A 3-2 loss in a friendly against Denmark at Old Trafford was followed by a 1-1 draw in Portugal and a 1-0 loss in Sweden. Glenn Johnson, Scott Parker, Alan Thompson, Jermaine Defoe, and Anthony Gardiner made their debuts in this game. Before the Euros, the FA Summer Tournament would take place at the City of Manchester Stadium in Manchester. A 1-1 draw against Japan was followed by a 6-1 win over Iceland, enough to win this minor competition. Apart from Ferdinand, this time they had no absences. Ashley Cole, Stephen Gerrard, John Terry, Sol Campbell, David Beckham, Paul Scholes, Wayne Rooney, Michael Owen, Frank Lampard, Jamie Carragher, Owen Hargreaves, and Joe Cole were among the men selected. Fitting Lampard, Gerrard, and Scholes all in was often tricky for Eriksson. Scholes would play on the left, which led to much criticism. He defends this by noting that Gerrard and Lampard could hardly play anywhere else, and that he disagrees with the notion that the two couldn't play together. Thus, Scholes was the best fit at left midfield, and it wasn't like there was a good alternative in that position anyway. He also did not have the wingers to attempt a three-man midfield. Euro 2004's host was Portugal, and England were placed in a group with France, Switzerland, and Croatia. Eriksson would feel at home as the Estadio da Luz was the host for the opening game against France. England played well, with a goal from Lampard separating the sides at half-time. However, Beckham missed a penalty and paid the price in injury as Zidane scored a free kick, and a Gerrard error led to a penalty, also converted by Zidane. It was a good performance, but a bad result. The Estadio Cidade de Coimbra in Coimbra was the location for the next game against Switzerland. Apart from replacing Ledley King with John Terry in defence, the same team was used. England struggled, but against the run of play, they got the goal in the first half from Wayne Rooney, who became the youngest player to score at the Euros. After a red card for Switzerland, Rooney's second, and one from Steven Gerrard meant it ended in a 3-0 win. Euro 2004 is often romanticised by England fans, basically solely because of Rooney's performances. This led to a tight final day, with France on 4 points, England on 3, Croatia on 2, and Switzerland on 1. England would want to win over Croatia in Lisbon to avoid keeping an eye on results elsewhere. A same team was used as the Switzerland game, and though Niko Kovac gave Croatia the lead early on, England were dominant, with goals from Paul Scholes and Wayne Rooney before half-time. Rooney and Lampard got the others in a 4-2 win, which sent them to the quarter-finals. It was only the second time they had gotten past the first round in a Euros, the first being 1996 on home soil. However, since then, they've reached the knockout stages in every tournament they've qualified for. Host Portugal at his beloved Estadio da Luz was the quarter-final. The same 11 players that had swept aside Switzerland and Croatia. Standing against them were a team containing the likes of Deco, Luis Figo, and a teenage Cristiano Ronaldo. England took the lead early on through Michael Owen, but a huge blow came when Rooney got injured. They lost until near the end, but Helder Postiga sent the game to extra time. A Sol Campbell goal was ruled out for a foul that didn't happen by John Terry. A long-range shot by Rui Costa looked to doom England, but Frank Lampard rescued them, sending the game to penalties, something England had practiced at length. Before the game, Eriksson had complained about the grass around the penalty spot. They received assurances it would be fixed, but these were not followed up. Thus, Beckham blasted his first penalty high. Rui Costa missed his as well, though, and England went to sudden death. Ashley Cole and Postiga both scored theirs, but Darius Vassell, the man who came on for Rooney, saw his saved. Then Portugal goalie Ricardo scored his to send England out. Their penalty curse, which eliminated them in 1990, 1996, and 1998, saw them out again. This was a huge what if for England. What if Rooney hadn't been injured? What if the referee had allowed Campbell's legitimate goal? What if the grass had been fixed? What if England held on against France and played Greece instead? There seems to be a recurring theme in the history of the national team, and it was a curse Eriksson failed to break, but the result was the same. Failure. Heroic failure, maybe, but failure nonetheless. The next few weeks would be tumultuous, as the details of another affair leaked in the news of the world, which led to massive chaos within the FA as they tried to cover it up. But in the end, Eriksson escaped. Another 2-year cycle would have to begin with a friendly at home to Ukraine at St James's Park. They won 3-0. In qualifying, England were joined by Poland, Austria, Northern Ireland, Wales, and Azerbaijan. Only the group winner would be guaranteed the finals, with some runners-up also going through. The first game was away to Austria. Even though England led 2-0 through Gerrard and Lampard, Austria got one back and then equalised thanks to an error by David James. Eriksson stated that James had everything a goalkeeper wanted, but made one big error every game, and that was too big a problem. After that, he never picked James again. They then visited Poland in Chorzów, a game they won 2-1. Eriksson remembers this trip due to a memorable trip to the former concentration camp at Auschwitz, which had a deep effect on the team. The next international break went well, beating Wales 2-0 at Old Trafford and Azerbaijan 1-0 in Baku. They finished off the year 2004 with a 1-0 loss away to Spain in a friendly. 2005 started with a 0-0 draw in a friendly against the Netherlands at Villa Park. Back to competitive football, they beat Northern Ireland 4-0 and Azerbaijan 2-0 at Old Trafford and St James's Park, respectively. In May, England travelled to the United States for a pair of friendlies, beating their host 2-1 and Colombia 3-2. However, they lost 4-1 away to Denmark in August. The September international break started well with a 1-0 win away to Wales. The next played Northern Ireland in Belfast, a game that would unfortunately for Eriksson go down in green and white army folklore. Eriksson had experimented with Beckham in defensive midfield and Rooney on the left wing, and this led to Northern Ireland winning 1-0. The thing was, this wasn't the game to try that. England couldn't lose to Northern Ireland. It's a rivalry, yes, but one-sided. In Ulster, they would remember this game for years to come. But in England, games against Northern Ireland are supposed to be simple affairs. This meant the last two games were crucial against Austria and Poland at Old Trafford. They won 1-0 against Austria despite David Beckham picking up a red card. This was enough to qualify with a game to spare. An impressive 2-1 win against Poland without the suspended Beckham led to some calling for him to be dropped, but Eriksson gave that little thought. He had qualified England to another World Cup, and when he signed for them, this was the tournament they were targeting. The last game of 2005 was a memorable friendly against Argentina and Switzerland, with a brace from Michael Owen in the last 5 minutes, giving England a comeback win against their rivals. In January 2006, he was stung by an undercover reporter, Majer Mahmoud. Mahmoud posed as a rich Emirati who wanted to buy Aston Villa and asked Eriksson whether he would be interested in joining. Eriksson agreed, and this left the FA furious, trying to sack him. In the end, a compromise was reached where he'd be removed after the 2006 World Cup. After this, he successfully sued the News of the World for libel. In the first game of 2006, England beat Uruguay 2-1 in a friendly at Anfield. They then had their pre-tournament games both at Old Trafford, beating Hungary 3-1 and Jamaica 6-0. The 2006 squad was packed with stellar names: Beckham, Ferdinand, Cole, Terry, Lampard, Campbell, Gerrard, Owen, and so on. Wayne Rooney was picked despite an injury scare and shouting match with Sir Alex Ferguson. A big surprise was the teenage Theo Walcott. England had a relatively simple group with Trinidad and Tobago, Sweden, and Paraguay. At the Waldstadion in Frankfurt, their World Cup started against Paraguay. Rooney's injury meant they would rest him for the first couple of games. They went ahead through an own goal in the fourth minute, and though the rest of the game petered out, they got the win they wanted. Next was Trinidad and Tobago at the Frankenstadion in Nuremberg. The game was tougher than their Caribbean opponents' reputations suggested, but late goals from Peter Crouch and Steven Gerrard got them a 2-0 win. Another date with the Eriksson's home country of Sweden was next at the Mungersdorfer Stadion in Cologne. Rooney returned, but a blow came in the fourth minute as Michael Owen was injured. Eriksson describes this looking back in near apocalyptic terms, comparing it to if Brazil lost Ronaldo in 2002. The game finished 2-2 with Joe Cole scoring England's opener and Gerrard getting what looked like a late winner until a 90th minute equaliser for the Swedes. Instead of replacing Owen with Peter Crouch, he decided to use Michael Carrick as a holding midfielder to allow Lampard and Gerrard more freedom to support in attack. Gottlieb Daimler Stadion in Stuttgart was the venue as they faced Ecuador in the round of 16. It wasn't a particularly convincing performance, but England won 1-0 thanks to a David Beckham free kick. This set up another match with Portugal in the quarter-final at the Arena auf Schalke in Gelsenkirchen. Gary Neville returned, meaning Owen Hargreaves could take Carrick's role in defensive midfield. Eriksson was confident at the chance for vengeance. It was a tight game, with a blow coming as David Beckham was forced off. An even bigger issue was to come minutes later when Rooney was sent off for violent conduct. After this, Eriksson points out Hargreaves' performance, managing to keep England in the game without conceding for half an hour, and then another half hour of extra time. He brought on Crouch to try and nick an aerial goal, but none came and it was penalties again. Portugal took the lead in the shootout as Lampard missed, but then they missed their second spot grid and Hargreaves converted to restore parity. Portugal missed again and then so did Gerrard. With 2 penalties to go, Portugal scored theirs, as did Jamie Carragher. However, the whistle hadn't been blown and so he had to take it again. This time it was saved. Cristiano Ronaldo scored his penalty and England were out of the World Cup. Eriksson's time at England was over. Today, much is said about Eriksson's time as England manager. When he died last year, there was a wave of sympathy and nostalgia about the man, a friendly Swede who had taken on the media, which was massively abusive towards him because of his nationality and unduly interested in his private life. The impression I get is that he didn't really care that much about the media because he didn't read it. He trusted his players a lot, leading them to be able to talk to family. This led to its own media obsession, with the height of interest of so-called wags, wives and girlfriends, many of them glamorous models and celebrities, in the English press, something Eriksson has been criticised for, seeing it as a distraction. Were England's players really distracted on the pitch because their girlfriends were in the stands? That's debatable. The stakes were too high for that to matter anyway. This England side is often known as the Golden Generation, full of unbelievable talent, although they did not have the world class players in every position. The common narrative about England, sometimes relayed by players as well, is this. Under Eriksson, and going on to the next few managers, the player did not get on well due to the ferocity of the Premier League, with the players from Manchester United, Chelsea, and so on forming cliques and not getting well. This has become a recurring problem for England and was only solved by Gareth Southgate before the 2018 World Cup, leading to a tactically less sophisticated manager getting their best performance in the tournament since 1996. However, a lot of football seems to be luck, and Eriksson is keen to point out moments where he didn't have that. David Seaman's error against Brazil, without which England would have probably made a final. Rooney's injury in 2004 and Owen's in 2006, as well as the red card for Rooney and injury for Beckham against Portugal in 2006. Penalties, a recurring problem, again only really solved under Southgate. Whatever it was, Eriksson ultimately failed with a brilliant England team, although succeeding in international football, where you have to be basically perfect and only get a chance once every 2 years, is perhaps the most difficult thing to do. Most of the time in Eriksson's career, he left to get another job. He left Degerfors to move up to Göteborg, and then he left Göteborg to move to Benfica. He left Benfica to go to Roma, and after resigning in the capital, quickly went to Fiorentina. He left Fiorentina to return to Benfica, and left them a second time to go to Sampdoria, whom he left to go to Blackburn. He didn't actually join Rovers, instead choosing Lazio. At Lazio, he resigned early with the England job lined up. Therefore, he had never been out of a job for long, and the 2006-07 season was full of incredibly long days, waiting for the phone to ring. A trip to Qatar to perhaps manage their national team ended without success. Dynamo Kiev had also called, with the plan being to take charge of Ukraine after a couple of years at their home tournament, Euro 2012. He was close to taking it, but a more appealing job came up. Manchester City is now known as the current king of English football, but anyone watching this channel knows it wasn't always like that. In fact, they were a mediocre Premier League team who were overshadowed by Manchester United. Before the famous UAE takeover, there was another by the Thai politician and businessman Thaksin Shinawatra. He promised what the Emiratis would actually bring after him: big money signings and endless success. Man City had come 14th in the 2006-07 season, just 4 points clear of relegation. Their squad, to be frank, matched that record. Eriksson also thought it was thin, so with their Thai money, instead of spending it all on a couple of big stars, he spread it round the club. Italian forward Rolando Bianchi came in for £8.8 million from Regina as the most expensive signing, and Swiss midfielder Gelson Fernandes was bought from Sion for £4.2 million. Brazilian midfielder Giovanni joined from Cruzeiro for free, while Bulgarian midfielder Martin Petrov joined from Atletico Madrid for £4.7 million. Croatian defender Vedran Chorluka and Brazilian midfielder Elano cost £8 million each from Dinamo Zagreb and Shakhtar Donetsk respectively, while Spanish defender Javier Garrido cost £1.5 million from Real Sociedad. Bulgarian forward Valery Boyanov cost £5.75 million from Fiorentina. These sums don't sound like a lot, but it was £40 million into mid-table Premier League club back when football inflation had only just started. Some of the squad from last season was removed. Defenders Hatem Trabelsi and Sylvan Distan, as well as midfielder Joey Barton, had already gone by the time he took charge, as had goalie Nicky Weaver. He also got rid of midfielder Trevor Sinclair, who joined Cardiff for free, as well as some fringe players. Forward Bernardo Corradi was loaned to Parma. The media worry that all of these new players will not gel, especially due to the cosmopolitan nature of the team. However, in their opening game away to West Ham, goals from Bianchi and Giovanni gave them a surprise 2-0 win. They beat Derby 1-0 at home in their next game, before hosting bitter rivals Manchester United. United were the best team in the country in this era, and so City always wanted to beat their big brother. United dominated the game, but City defended well and won 1-0 thanks to a deflected effort from Giovanni. Despite losing their next game away to Arsenal 1-0, where they were dominant against a Champions League side but lost to a late goal, Eriksson was named August's Premier League Manager of the Month. Boyanov was injured and out for the season against United. Scoring goals was a problem without him, as Bianchi did not perform well in the Premier League. At the other end, things were better, as Richard Dunn was a good leader at the back, and he decided to promote Joe Hart to first-team goalie. Mika Richards had also won Premier League Player of the Month in August and was showing great talent. They had a strong start to the season, ending the calendar year 2007 in fourth place. They had made the League Cup quarter-finals, finally knocked out to Spurs. Bianchi only managed 5 goals, so was loaned to Lazio. Meanwhile, more money was spent on two forwards. 5.2 million for Ecuadorian Felipe Caicedo from Basel and 3.87 million for Zimbabwean Benjani from Portsmouth. After a win against Newcastle, they went on a difficult stretch in January and February, losing to Everton, drawing with West Ham and Derby, and losing to Arsenal. They were also knocked out of the FA Cup by second-tier Sheffield United. The next game was away to Manchester United, who hadn't lost at home all season. Played on the 50th anniversary of the Munich air disaster, there was a great sense of occasion due to the memorial ceremony beforehand and special sponsorless kits designed to evoke the era. When the football began, goals from Vassell and Benjani gave City a 2-1 win, and the first double over United in 38 years. After this, they went on a poor run, winning just 1 in 7. This still puts a team who wasn't far off relegation the season before in ninth, but Thaksin, who Eriksson makes clear knows nothing about football, wanting him to pick a player based on his looks earning fans in Thailand, did not see it as good enough. They won their next two, but lost the next two after that, with their final game away to Middlesbrough, as it became clear he was going to lose his job despite the fan base and players being in support of him. Before the match, Richard Dunn said the players wanted to refuse to play. Eriksson disabused them of that notion, but Dunn got sent off early and Middlesbrough scored the penalty. With 10 men and the players unmotivated, Borough found scoring easy, winning the game 8-1. City finished ninth, but entered UEFA Cup qualifying because they got the fair play spot. Again, the players wanted to refuse to play in a postseason tour of Asia, with games in Thailand and Hong Kong, but Eriksson convinced them. They lost both games against a Thai League All-Star 11 and a Hong Kong Invitational 11. After this, Eriksson was formally sacked. 2 months later, Thaksin sold Man City to the Emiratis and ended up being embroiled in all sorts of legal trouble. Just like his chance at inheriting the great AC Milan side decades prior, Eriksson wondered what would have happened if the sale was just a couple months earlier. He believes the Emiratis would have kept him and he would have been able to spend their untold money. After this, he started receiving a couple of offers. There was talk from Lazio and Fenerbahce, but nothing concrete. Benfica came calling, but he felt that he had already done all he could in Portugal, and they didn't have the resources to compete with Porto at the time. In the end, he took the job at the Mexican national team. Mexico are known for the fourth game curse, being unable to advance past the fourth game in the World Cup. Therefore, his target, to reach a World Cup quarter-final, was the same result he lost his job for with England. Of course, the players weren't the same. Qualifying started with Mexico receiving a bye to the second round. A two-legged match against Belize before Eriksson took over, which Mexico won 9-0 on aggregate. Then there would be a third round group, the top two teams of which would advance to the fourth and final round. Mexico's group had Honduras, Jamaica, and Canada. Mexico played their first game in August at home to Honduras at the legendary Estadio Azteca in Mexico City, a place where Mexico could not lose without dire consequences. They won 2-1 thanks to a brace from Pavel Pardo. In September, they had their next home games. They were meant to play Jamaica away, but due to hurricanes, played their home leg at this time instead, winning 3-0. They also beat Canada 2-1, with the game being played instead at Estadio Victor Manuel Reina in Tuxtla Gutierrez, selected because the hot temperatures were thought to be able to unsettle the Canadian players. Though their home field was a cauldron, Mexico didn't perform well away. In the rescheduled game in Kingston, on a poor pitch which was overgrown, they lost 1-0 to Jamaica. They could only manage a 2-2 draw against Canada in Edmonton. With a game to go, they were on 10 points. Honduras were on 9, and Jamaica on 7. However, the goal difference was such that it would take a miracle for them to miss out. A 1-0 loss away to Honduras, then, was enough to get them through ahead of Jamaica on goal difference. But worry was starting to fester in the halls of power of Mexican football. The fourth and final round of North American qualifying is known as the hexagonal, where 6 teams play each other home and away. The top three would make the World Cup, with fourth place getting a playoff. Mexico's biggest rival is the United States, who used the same trick Mexico did, picking Chile Columbus as the venue for the first match. The other teams in the group were Honduras, Costa Rica, El Salvador, and Trinidad and Tobago. Despite playing well, they were hit on the break and lost 2-0. 2-0 became a common scoreline in matches between the two teams, and a common taunt by American fans over Mexico. Eriksson's job was at risk going into the March international break, especially as Javier Aguirre, who the Mexican FA had told him was their first choice all along when he was appointed, had left Atletico Madrid and was available. They beat Costa Rica 2-0 at home, but after a 3-1 loss away to Honduras, Eriksson was sacked after just 9 games. A new opportunity was presented to Eriksson after this, one not like those before. Instead of manager, he would be director of football. This club was not in the Premier League, Serie A, or even the Portuguese or Swedish leagues. It was Notts County in League Two, the fourth tier of English football. Though they have notoriety as the oldest professional football club in the world and the inspiration for Juventus's black and white kits, Notts County had spent the 1990s and 2000s in financial trouble. However, they had been bought by a consortium purportedly connected to the Bahraini royal family, looking to spend huge amounts of money to boost the club, getting them rapidly to the Premier League. Though the funds were opaque, they had a guarantee from the First London Bank, and the FA and Football League said all was in order. This was a new challenge and a risk for his career, but it was appealing. Imagine being the man who masterminded a League Two club becoming a Premier League giant. Eriksson mostly signed League Two quality players, but then the £1.4 million signing of Kasper Schmeichel, a goalkeeper he worked with at Manchester City, raised eyebrows. It was the highest fee ever paid by a League Two club. They even bought in Sol Campbell, but he left after 1 game. The backer of the consortium was Russell King, who was sociable to Eriksson but hid away from the public. Eriksson was so enthusiastic about the role that he rejected the Sweden job. It was probably the biggest mistake of his career. Russell King was a fraudster and he lied about his connection with the Bahraini royal family. The only reason the bank guaranteed the takeover was that King had taken over 49% of it by lying about his dealings with Bahrain. As it turned out, a victim of their con would be the government of North Korea. Under sanctions, the so-called Hermit Kingdom was desperate for foreign cash reserves, and so when King offered them plenty of US dollars in exchange for mining rights, they were willing to snap his hand off. To look more legitimate, they brought Eriksson along. Eriksson's visit to North Korea was full of strange episodes, including an official of their FA wondering if it was possible to help rig the World Cup draw. Stranger and stranger things were happening as the club was actually cash-strapped, unable to even pay the milk bill or players' salaries. However, he only had his suspicions confirmed when the BMW Sauber Formula One team, who King also tried to buy, called him and explained the fraud. The club was sold for £1 so new owners could be found. A new owner was found, Ray True, who bought it again for £1. Eriksson left the club, waving a multi-million-pound payoff, seen as a very generous decision by Eriksson to help save a now penniless League Two club that had been rinsed by a fraudster. In fact, there was no money left anyway. Despite the whole world considering it a fraud, because it was, interestingly, to his grave, Eriksson still thought King actually believed in what he was selling. He had lived in Bahrain even after his first fraud unharmed, and it's hardly as if Notts County was a lucrative target to steal money from, having not had much in the first place. I find it hard to agree, but if you are interested in the full story at Notts County, I recommend HITC7's video on the topic. There was some negotiation with the Nigeria job, but he took a different one, with Cote d'Ivoire, also known as in English as the Ivory Coast. They had qualified for the 2010 World Cup, but had just changed manager after being knocked out of the 2010 Africa Cup of Nations in the quarter-final. He spent 2 months jetting around Europe, where most of the players played, scouting talent. Their pre-World Cup training camp was in the Swiss Alps. Compared to the quiet England squad, the players were loud and boisterous, singing and dancing during the warm-up. but just as professional. The organisation was not, however. In the first friendly in France against Paraguay, the kitman was late and less than an hour before kickoff chucked some bags in, with players rummaging through the bag to find their number. Defender Emmanuel Labue's shoes hadn't arrived, so he couldn't play. This was the first thing Eriksson had to sort out, telling the kitman the next day that he had to hang up the shirts beforehand. The game ended in a 2-all draw. They had one more friendly against Japan in Sion in Switzerland, which they won 2-0. However, star forward Didier Drogba collided with a defender and started screaming, clutching his arm. It was broken. His club, Chelsea, did not want him to play, and the doctor, who had convinced Eriksson that bringing Rooney to the 2006 World Cup was fine, couldn't do it this time, stating that with insurance, he could not take the risk again, as if anything happened, he could be sued for millions. But Drogba offered to pay himself. He was so desperate to play for his country. Eriksson calls Drogba one of the most awe-inspiring players he had ever known, the nation's saviour. He had spent millions on charity projects and was again happy to pay the price to play for the Ivory Coast. As well as Drogba, Yaya Toure of Barcelona was a standout star. Every player in the squad, apart from the third-choice goalie, played in Europe, including Eboué, who played for Arsenal, and Yaya's brother Kolo Toure, who played for Eriksson's old club, Manchester City. They had a very tough group with Brazil and Portugal, as well as North Korea, or officially Korea DPR. Security was strict in their hotel in South Africa after security incidents in the Africa Cup of Nations in Angola, making it hard to go out. However, training went well. Drogba could not start the first game with his arm, but made the bench and would come on as they played Portugal at the Nelson Mandela Bay Stadium in Port Elizabeth. Because of their group, they had to attack, but the players were cautious. A nil-nil draw was actually a good result in a vacuum, but it made the arithmetic difficult with Brazil still to play at Soccer City in Johannesburg. He hoped to hit them on the counter-attack, knowing they were more vulnerable than the side that beat his England in 2002. However, Brazil scored due to an error in the first half and got another thanks to a handball not spotted by the referee. The game ended up finishing 3-1, with Drogba playing the whole game and getting the consolation. Even worse, Portugal went on to beat Korea DPR 7-0. This meant Brazil were on 6 points, Portugal were on 4, with a goal difference 9 better than Eriksson's team, the Ivory Coast, who were on 1. North Korea were out on no points, but for the Ivorians to go through, they would have to dole out an equally hefty thrashing to the Koreans, while hoping that Brazil would also give Portugal a walloping. Though they beat North Korea 3-0 at the Ubombela Stadium in Nelspruit, Portugal and Brazil played out a 0-0 draw, which suited both teams but knocked the Ivorians out of Africa's World Cup. Though Eriksson wanted to stay at the Ivory Coast, the salary was too low to stay long term, so he declined. He could take some satisfaction that the two teams that had dumped him, England and Mexico, the former managed by Fabio Capello, whom it is pretty clear Eriksson did not like, had pretty rubbish tournaments themselves. Instead of staying on with Cote d'Ivoire, he took a job with Leicester City. Leicester were in the Championship, England's second tier, but had a bad start to the season with just 5 points from 9 league games. However, they had been taken over by a new Thai consortium. Though he could not make new signings, he could bring in his former England forward Darius Vassell as he was out of contract. The season was strong for Eriksson's team. They were in the relegation zone when he took over, but soon moved up. His team played Man City in the third round of the FA Cup, drawing at home and forcing a replay, which they lost 4-2. It also took Premier League opposition in West Brom to get them out of the League Cup. By February, they were close to the playoffs, but then lost 4 out of their next 6. In the winter transfer window, Ivorian defender Sol Bambo was signed from Hibernian, while forward Matty Fryatt was sold to Hull for a sum of at least £1.2 million. Defender Michael Morrison was also shifted to Sheffield Wednesday. A lot of the business came with loan players, however. Defender Kyle Norton had come in from Spurs, and for the first half of the season, Irish defender Greg Cunningham came from Man City, which ended early because of a season-ending injury. For the rest of the season, another defender, Ben Mee, came in on loan from Man City, while Everton loaned them Nigerian forward Yakubu. Yakubu in particular was a success, scoring 11 goals, as Leicester finished 10th, 8 off the playoffs, but 25 clear of relegation. Personally, the year had some issues for Eriksson, including personal health struggles, the death of his mother, and the revelation that his phone had been hacked by the News of the World. The turnaround had been a success, but now the aim was promotion, and so big signings came in. Right back Lee Peltier joined from Huddersfield, while Danish goalie Kasper Schmeichel, a recurring character here, joined from Leeds. Central midfielder Neil Dans came in from Crystal Palace for free, and Irish centre-back Sean St Ledger joined from Preston. Free agent striker David Nugent came in, while centre-back Matt Mills joined from Reading. Left-back Paul Konchesky joined from Liverpool, with striker Jermaine Beckford also coming in from Everton. Gelson Fernandes also joined on loan from Saint Etienne. This is a goalie, a fullback four, two midfielders, and two strikers. Schmeichel would go on to win the Premier League a few seasons later. The major departure was centre-back Jack Hobbs, who joined Hull, while striker Martin Waghorn was loaned to the Tigers. Central midfielder Matt Oakley was loaned to Exeter. Eriksson wanted Yakubu, but it was too expensive, and though he was not convinced on Beckford, they were running out of time. The season started poorly, however, with just 5 wins in the opening 12, and the club knocked out of the League Cup in the third round on penalties away to Cardiff. The club were in ninth, not even in the playoffs, despite the expectation of promotion from the owners. After a 3-0 loss away to Millwall, he was sacked in October. Eriksson's career had gone south. As I previously noted, from when he got the Degerfors job in 1977, he had never been sacked, only moving up, or at least sideways. However, after leaving England in 2006, he had been sacked by Man City and Mexico, had a short-term role with the Ivory Coast, and been sacked again by Leicester, a second-tier team. He would find it hard to get another job in Europe, so instead his sights were set on Asia. Many people criticise players and managers who go to Asia, first with the Chinese Super League and now with the Saudi League. However, money will not be the only factor in their minds. The investment will prove that leagues are emerging, and it is a way to be part of a growing football landscape. Also, it is a chance to test yourself elsewhere and experience a foreign culture. He had talks with Chinese club Shandong Luang, and though nothing came of it, it did give him an interest in Chinese football. A project to buy a football club stalled, and Eriksson had nothing to do. So when he went to watch a game in Thailand and was offered to become technical director of Thai League One side BEC Tero Sasana, he thought, why not? He had a lot of influence as the club went third, but left at the end of the season. Thaksin, the old owner of Man City, had a lot of influence in Thailand, and his sister was now prime minister, and this made things awkward when he was in the country. He had links with German second-tier side 1860 Munich, but did not take the job because he was not sure how much they really wanted him, although the Germans did accidentally announce him as their new manager on the website. He also talked to Ukraine, but they found him too expensive. Instead, he became technical director of Al Nasser in the United Arab Emirates. He enjoyed his time there, but contrary to most people's perceptions, the club did not nearly have the ambitions he expected. They rejected his idea of bringing a now nearly retired David Beckham in, even though Beckham was willing to come, thinking it too expensive. In 2013, he received another offer, with a big positive that he would actually be the head coach. His time in the UAE made him more desperate to be on the training field, not viewing himself as an administrator. The job was to become manager of Guangzhou RNF in the Chinese Super League. When he took charge, the club was 13th, but they rose to finish 6th, 11 points off continental football. They also made the fourth round of the Chinese FA Cup, being knocked out by Jiangsu Sainty. The next season, they improved to third, 13 points off the title, qualifying for the Asian Champions League preliminary round 2, again making the fourth round of the FA Cup, where they lost at home to Shandong Luneng Taishan. However, the renegotiation of his contracts led to disagreements, so he left Guangzhou at the end of the 2014 season. In 2015, he instead joined Shanghai SIPG. Under the name Shanghai East Asia, they had come fifth the previous season, but acquired by new owners who renamed the club and signed Eriksson. With Ghanaian striker Asamoah Gyan among the players, he led the team to second, only missing the title by 2 points, and making the Champions League playoffs. They reached the quarter-final of the FA Cup, where they lost on penalties to rival Shanghai Greenland Shenhua. Next season, Brazilian duo Elkerson and Hulk were the most noteworthy signings. They came third in the league, again making the Champions League playoffs. In the FA Cup, they reached the fourth round, but lost 1-0 away to his old team, Guangzhou RNF. In the Champions League playoffs, they beat Thai side Muang Thong United 3-0 at home, advancing to the groups. Their group had Australian side Melbourne Victory, Suwon Samsung Blue Wings from the Korea Republic, and Gamba Osaka of Japan. Despite losing the first game in Melbourne 2-1, they won their next four on the trot to top the group, losing their last game when they were already through. In the round of 16, they faced FC Tokyo from Japan. In Tokyo, they lost 2-1 thanks to a brace from Kota Mizunuma, with Wu Lei scoring the Red Eagles goal. It looks like they would head out in a frustrating game in Shanghai, but Wu scored in injury time to send them through on away goals, sparking bedlam amongst the 27,000 fans who would always be eager to get one over a team from Japan. Wu turned out to be one of the finest Chinese players of his generation, scoring 38 goals in Eriksson's 2 seasons in Shanghai and ending up playing for Espanyol in Spain. In the quarters, they faced Jeonbuk Hyundai Motors from the Korea Republic. There was a 0-0 draw in Shanghai and the same scoreline at half-time in Seoul. However, Eriksson's team conceded too early in the second half, and after a red card, 3 more late on to lose 5-0. Though Eriksson had done a good job, he was considered by now too conservative for the club to make a real breakthrough, and replaced at the end of the 2016 season. For the 2017 season, he became manager of Shenzhen in the China League One, China PR's second tier of football. They had come ninth in the season beforehand. The club were early leaders, winning the opening 5 games, but soon went on a 9-match winless streak, and Eriksson was sacked in June. They were also knocked out of the FA Cup in the third round by Super League Hebei China Fortune. In 2018, he took what was to be his final managerial job, in charge of the Philippines for the AFF Championship, the tournament to determine the champions of Southeast Asia. Most of his squad played in the Philippines, with 3 playing in Thailand, 1 in Malaysia, and one free agent. Only 3 played in Europe, with the most famous probably being goalie Neil Etheridge at Cardiff City. In their group, they would play 2 teams at home and 2 away, with the top 2 going to the semis. A 1-0 win at home to Singapore was followed by a 3-2 draw win away to East Timor, held in Malaysia. They got a 1-1 draw at home to Thailand. A goalless draw away to Indonesia was enough to come second in the group, setting up a semi-final date with Vietnam. In the home leg, they lost 2-1, and despite some resilience in Hanoi, they conceded 2 late goals to lose 2-1 again, being knocked out 4-2 on aggregate. However, Filipino football had already had its finest moment before Eriksson arrived, in qualifying for the 2019 Asian Cup in the UAE, their first ever. Etheridge was not present, but their squad had many of the same players. Most of the players again played in the Philippines or Thailand, with 1 in Malaysia and 3 in Europe, playing in Romania, Denmark, and Germany. Their group contained the Korea Republic, China PR, and Kyrgyzstan. In the opening game, they faced Asian giants, the Korea Republic, and managed a creditable 1-0 loss at the Al Maktoum Stadium in Dubai. However, their next game at the Mohammed bin Zayed Stadium in Abu Dhabi against China PR saw a 3-0 loss, with Wu Lei scoring 2 of the goals. The final game came against Kyrgyzstan in the Rashid Stadium in Dubai. They lost 3-1, with Vitaly Lux scoring a hat-trick. However, Stefan Struck scored a consolation for the Philippines, their first goal in the Asia Cup. It would be the last goal Eriksson would ever see as a manager. Eriksson was obsessed with football and continued as consultant with the team even after he left the coaching job. When he revealed that his life was ending in January, an outpouring of love came for him, especially in his native Sweden, England, Italy, and Portugal. A lifelong Liverpool fan, a campaign was given to allow him to manage a Legends team in a game at Anfield, which was successful. He was honoured at the stadiums of his clubs, including Benfica and Lazio, the sites of his greatest successes. He died on the 26th of August 2024. Eriksson is considered a managerial giant, but his trophy haul is not nearly as big as that of Sir Alex Ferguson, Pep Guardiola, or Carlo Ancelotti, the latter of whom he was a major influence on. He has 1 Serie A title, 4 Italian Cups, 2 Italian Super Cups, 3 Portuguese titles, 1 Portuguese Cup, 1 Portuguese Super Cup, a Swedish title, 2 Swedish Cups, and the regional third-tier title he won at Degerfors. On the European stage, he won the UEFA Cup, the UEFA Cup Winners' Cup, and the UEFA Super Cup, while also being the runner-up in a European Cup and 2 more UEFA Cups. A chance call helped him get the first job of his career at Degerfors, but chance also stopped him getting the biggest jobs, especially with Milan, as well as getting unfairly sacked 2 months before the Man City takeover. After Göteborg took a chance on him and were rewarded, he moved to Benfica, and then after succeeding there went to Italy. He managed Roma, Sampdoria, Fiorentina, and Lazio, big clubs, but none of Italy's big three. Something always kept him from a top job until he won a Scudetto at Lazio and got the England role. He would never win a trophy again. At England, he did not succeed, although as time goes on, people appreciate the job he did more. However, he failed with what was a fantastic squad to make it past the quarter-finals, being given 3 chances to do so. Each time, luck was a big factor, with penalties the reason twice, but you make your own luck in this sport. After he left England, his career was never the same. At Man City, he did well, but was sacked unfairly and was given no time by Mexico, who did not want him in the first place. He took a big risk rejecting Sweden to join Notts County, and this did not pay off, with the whole operation a big fraud. After a short period at the Ivory Coast, who he should have stayed with, he went to second-tier Leicester, where he got sacked, formally ending his career as a manager at the top level, spending the rest of his career in Asia. He had consulting roles in Thailand and the UAE before finally getting back into managing with Guangzhou RNF. He did well there and moved to Shanghai SIPG, where he also did a decent job and got sacked. The fresh young coach who did so well at Benfica and Lazio was now seen as a conservative old man who football had moved past. His next job was getting sacked months after at Shenzhen in the second tier, and his final role saw him lead the Philippines in their first Asian Cup, where they lost every game. Another side to the Eriksson coin is his glamorous personal life. I feel less at home talking about affairs and finances on this channel, but it connects with his football. The impression I got was that he was happy to let things happen to him. If a woman wanted to go out for dinner and maybe more with him, then sure, why not? It didn't matter if he was married. If an unknown consortium wanted him to invest in a company or join a League Two football club, which they promised would definitely have loads of money at some point, sounds great. Why not pop along to North Korea? That would be fun. He was also someone who trusted his players on the pitch and in training, being of the philosophy that they were adults who knew what to do. After England, the only job he got that could be considered one at the absolute pinnacle of football, and then especially after Man City, his career plummeted. The 2000 Supercoppa Italiana was the last trophy he ever won, and City was the last team who played in a European top flight he managed. Mexico was a big job, but they never really wanted him. Notts County was a fraud, and the Ivory Coast was just short terms. Big opportunities at Sweden and Ukraine weren't taken, and after the Leicester failure, it was basically over. Reading his autobiography, which he wrote in between going to Leicester and Guangzhou, you get the idea of a football obsessive who cared about little else, not even really his wife and kids, nor even money. He loved his family, yes, but put football first, even above his own safety at times. For Sven-Göran Eriksson, football truly was larger than life.